The Ozarks are full of stories no one repeats after sunset, but some tales claw their way out of the soil whether we want them to or not. Tonight's story comes from a place where the mountains swallow screams, where the earth never stops breathing, and where a pair of sisters built a cabin for a purpose so vile that even the forest tried to bury it. 19 men vanished without a trace in the winter of 1894. Folks said the Harlow Sisters were just strange mountain women. They had no idea what lived beneath their floorboards or why those sisters were chosen to feed it. This is the truth behind the breeding cabin and the creature those women worshipped in the dirt below. Some stories are forgotten for a reason, but once you hear this one, you'll understand why no one sleeps near the Harlow Ridge anymore. Welcome to Forgotten Remains. The Ozark Mountains swallow sound, the way an old grave swallows a name. People who step too far into the hollers don't scream, they just stop being heard. That's why the hunters who ran out of the woods that morning weren't screaming. They were too shocked for that. They ran like animals set on fire, eyes wide, shirts torn, mud soaked into their knees. Only one of them managed to form words. There's a cabin out there. Under the ridge. And men. God help us, men under the floor. No one believed them at first. The Ozarks had always carried their own set of ghost stories. Lights that flicker between the pines. Footsteps that trail you even though nothing's behind you. And the oldest of them all, the Harlow Sisters. 2 women who lived in the deep woods back in 1894. Tall, silent, feral. Always seen together. Always watching. People claimed they weren't quite right. But people say that about anyone who chooses the woods over a town. Still, no one forgot their eyes. Flat, glassy, empty. Like something wearing human faces just well enough to pass in daylight. And then one winter, they vanished. No bodies. No graves. Just a cabin that sank deeper into the dirt each year, leaning hard to the side like it was tired of holding on. Locals avoided it. Kids dared other kids to touch the porch and run back before the dark came alive. But nobody ever found anything inside. Until that morning, when the hunters led the sheriff back to the cabin, the boards were split like rotten teeth. Moss climbed the walls. Windows were black mirrors filled with nothing but waiting. The sheriff tested the door. It opened with a groan so long and low it sounded alive. Inside was dust. Silence. A single chair tipped over. A stove that hadn't seen fire in decades. And then they heard it. Not words. Not crying. A scraping. Soft. Slow. From beneath the floorboards, the sheriff dropped to one knee. Pressed his ear to the wood. The scraping stopped. Then, so close beneath him he felt the breath push warm through the cracks. A whisper. Is it morning? Please. Please say it's morning. The sheriff stumbled back, shouting orders, pulling men inside to lift the boards. They pried up the first rotten plank with a crowbar. A smell hit them. Wet earth, rusted iron, and something else no one wanted to name. Under the board was darkness. Carved out dirt. A space too tight for anyone to move. Then a hand shot up, thin. Trembling. Gray as moth wings. It clawed toward the light, reaching, shaking, begging. Feet pounded. Crowbars slammed. Boards flew up, one after another. The hole widened, and widened, and widened, until the sheriff realized it wasn't one man. It wasn't 2. It was a room under the cabin. A chamber. A prison. And when the final board came loose and the lantern light spilled in, 19 faces stared up at them. Eyes sunken. Bodies thin. Chains sunk deep into wrists. Beards tangled into their own shirts. 19 men. Alive. Barely. Every one of them whispering the same thing. Is it morning yet? Did the sisters leave? Are we safe? But the worst part wasn't the men. It wasn't the chains. It wasn't even the carved sigils burned into the dirt walls. It was the far end of the chamber, where a tunnel stretched out into the earth, sloping deeper, winding into darkness, carved by something that didn't use hands. And at the very edge of the lantern light, a footprint. Not a man's, not a woman's. Long, split. Inhuman, fresh. The sheriff lowered his lantern, face drained of color. The hunters backed toward the door. The wind howled through the cabin cracks as if carrying a message. The Harlow Sisters never left, and whatever they created down there wasn't finished. Every rescued man was carried out on makeshift stretchers, blinking like newborn animals who'd never seen sunlight. Some shielded their eyes. Some wept. Some screamed, and one simply stared at the cabin, silent, waiting. Almost listening for something to crawl out behind them. The doctor wanted them taken straight to town, but the sheriff shook his head. Not until we know what we're dealing with. They brought the men to the old church on Buckhorn Road. Lanterns lit the pews. Blankets lined the floor, and the mountain wind pounded the windows, angry, as if trying to break in. The survivors didn't speak at first, not until the sheriff placed the lantern in the center of the room and said quietly, "We found the tunnel. We know someone or something was still down there." That's when the oldest of the men lifted his head. His beard was matted, his skin stretched thin around his skull, but his eyes were sharp. Too sharp for someone who'd been chained in darkness for God knows how long. "They're not gone," he whispered. "Who?" the sheriff asked. The man's voice trembled. "The Harlow Sisters." A low murmur rippled through the survivors, fear so deep it didn't sound human. Another man spoke next. "They weren't right. Not in the head. Not in the body, neither. They'd come to us out of the dark, move without sound, like they were sliding across the ground instead of walking." A younger survivor, shaking violently, added, They fed us only at night, never spoke, never looked at us directly, but they'd stand at the edge of the pit and listen. Always listening. They liked when we prayed. Laughed at it sometimes." The old man lifted his trembling hand. "No, it wasn't laughter. It was breathing. They mimicked us, the way a hunter mimics a wounded animal." One survivor clawed at his chain wounds as if remembering the cold metal. "They kept saying we were chosen, that we were needed. Said the Harlow blood must grow, must spread." A sickening silence swallowed the room. The sheriff stiffened. "Did they touch you? Hurt you?" All the men shook their heads violently. "No," the old man whispered. "Not like that. Not in the way you're thinking." He swallowed hard. "They didn't need us for that. They weren't human enough for it." The sheriff's face tightened. "What did they do to you?" The men looked at each other, bracing themselves against the memory. Finally, one spoke. "They bled us." Another added, "They took our nails, our hair." Another, "They made us breathe in their smoke, the kind they brewed in that iron pot." The old man's voice went flat. "They were making copies." The room froze. "Copies?" the sheriff said. "We weren't there to father anything. They, the sisters, they were trying to build something. Something that looked like people, talked like people, but weren't." A survivor on the far bench burst into tears. "They keep them in the woods. The failed ones. They crawl in the trees. They sleep in the river mud. They follow the sisters like dogs." The old man grabbed the sheriff's arm. "You didn't see the tunnel, Sheriff. You didn't see the marks. They were carving things down there. Sculpting bones, mixing blood with clay." A lantern flickered violently as a gust hit the church wall. The youngest survivor whispered, "Some nights we heard them dragging something big through the tunnel. Something that didn't breathe right." "What do you mean?" the sheriff asked. The man leaned forward. "It breathed, backwards." The sheriff felt his stomach twist. Still, the worst was yet to come. The old man pointed toward the door as if expecting something to step through it. The sisters weren't making more of themselves. He took a shaking breath. They were making more of what they worshipped. The sheriff stepped backward, pale. And what exactly was that? All 19 survivors turned their heads toward the church window. Wind clawed at the glass. Shadows bent in the trees. Something moved far too fast between the pines. The old man whispered, "We don't know its name," but the sisters called it their father. A chill knifed through the entire room. "And Sheriff," the man added, almost choking, "when you opened the floor, when the light touched us, something in the tunnel crawled deeper underground. It didn't flee." He swallowed hard. "It went to tell him." The lantern hissed and died, plunging the church into pitch black. Outside, something screamed. Not human, not animal, not anything from this world. Long, cold, through the trees, up the ridge, calling something home. The sheriff gathered a search party before dawn. Not because he wanted to, but because the survivors refused to sleep. All 19 of them stared at the church doors the entire night, jumping at every wind gust, flinching at their own shadows. Every time branches scraped the roof, they whispered, "It followed us. It's looking for us. It wants us back." By sunrise, the sheriff had no choice. He rounded up 6 men, rifles loaded, lanterns swinging, and headed toward the ridge where the Harlow cabin leaned like a broken rib poking through the dirt. The woods felt wrong, too quiet. Not a bird, not a bug, not even the hum of morning. Just air so still it felt pressed down by something heavy. Watching, the path twisted deeper into the pines, where the ground swallowed footprints faster than they could make them. One of the younger deputies slowed, whispering, "Sheriff, do you smell that?" The sheriff did. Rot. Old rot. Thick as wet leather left in a cellar. The same smell from under the floorboards. They rounded a bend and saw it. A body, or what was left of one, half buried in the leaf litter, like the forest tried to cover it up. The sheriff knelt beside it. The corpse was a man. But not one of the 19. Too intact. Too fresh. Clothes still on his back, boots still tied. The skin had turned grayish-blue, stiff with cold. But that wasn't the part that froze everyone. It was his chest. It had caved inward, as if something had climbed inside his ribcage, and pushed until the bones bent outward like broken spokes. Deputy Crane stumbled back, gagging. What in God's name happened to him? He choked. The sheriff pointed to the ground around the body. Tracks. Dozens of them. Long. Split. Sharp-edged. Cut deep into the soft soil, and each was pointing toward the ridge. The dead man's face twisted toward the sky, wrongly. His jaw was stretched open far past what bone should allow, as if frozen mid-scream, or as if something forced itself out of his mouth. The sheriff leaned closer, then noticed something else. Inside the corpse's mouth, wedged between the teeth, was a small object. A piece of braided twine, old, frayed, knotted 3 times. A symbol the Ozarks knew too well. The Harlow Sisters' binding cord. Nobody touched it. Nobody said a word. Not until Deputy Crane looked past the trees and whispered, "Sheriff, I think we're being followed." All 6 men lifted their lanterns. Among the pines, something tall slipped behind a trunk. Silvery, thin, moving in a way no human body ever could. It shifted again, a long, pale arm stretching around a tree, just enough to be seen, just enough to show it was watching. The men raised their rifles. The sheriff hissed, "No. Lower your guns. If you wound something that doesn't feel pain, it won't run. It'll come straight for you." Whatever hid behind the tree stepped out further. Lantern light barely touched it. A face. Or a suggestion of one. Long hair hanging straight like wet threads. Cheekbones too sharp. Eyes too large, reflecting light like an animal. A woman. But wrong. Very wrong. The sheriff gripped his rifle. Mary. Harlow? The figure's head snapped to the side with a crack, as if her neck bent too far. Then, another figure appeared beside her, tall. Slender, dragging fingers along the bark, making a deep scraping sound. The second face peeked around the tree. Eyes empty, mouth stretched into a thin, silent grin. Deputy Crane whispered, "Dear God." The sisters. The sheriff stepped back, but the taller sister leaned forward just an inch, enough to show something was moving behind her, something pushing under her skin. Ripple, pulse, slither, as if something inside her body was rearranging its bones. Deputy Mason whispered, "We need to go, now." But the old Harlow cabin stood just 200 yards deeper into the woods. At its door was the tunnel, and whatever had breathed backwards. The sheriff clenched his jaw. "We're finishing this," he whispered. "Move." The group stepped forward, rifles raised, and behind them, branches snapped like jaws closing. Something was following. Close. Too close. And when they reached the edge of the clearing where the Harlow cabin stood, every lantern went out at the same time. Not from wind, not from accident, but as if a huge mouth inhaled, pulling the light away. The darkness swelled, and from somewhere behind the cabin, something crawled up from the dirt, slow, wet, and breathing wrong. The darkness swallowed the clearing like a living thing. The sheriff struck his lantern flint, but the spark fizzled out instantly, snatched away by something in the air. Deputy Mason whispered, voice trembling, "The woods ain't this dark." "Sheriff, this ain't natural darkness." The sheriff steadied his breathing, eyes fixed on the collapsed porch of the Harlow cabin. Something moved beneath it, slow, sticky, wet earth shifting, as if something large was pulling itself up from underground. A long, dragging inhale rose from beneath the boards, like lungs full of mud trying to learn how to breathe. Deputy Crane began stepping back. "Sheriff, we shouldn't be here. We need..." A hand shot out from the dirt. No, not a hand. A mockery of one. Fingers too long. Skin pale and soft like uncured clay. Nails black and peeling like rotted bark. It clawed its way out, dragging with it a shoulder, then a head. Everyone froze, because the face that rose from the mud was a man's face, a face they recognized. Deputy Mason whispered, "God, that's Carter Ewell." Carter Ewell had gone missing 4 months earlier, but the thing climbing out now, it wasn't him. The body was shaped like Carter's, yes. Clothes torn like Carter's. Boots identical, but the skin wasn't right. Too smooth in places, too stretched in others, as if molded by hands that didn't understand how humans fit together. The face looked carved. The eyes, hollow. The mouth too stiff, too straight, too unnatural. A puppet wearing stolen flesh. The sheriff lifted his rifle. "Mason, don't mistake that for Carter. That ain't the man we knew." The copy stood fully upright now, its head tilted in one deliberate jerking motion. Crack, crack. Its jaw shifted sideways, bending the wrong way. Then, it smiled. A long, slow tear of skin widening its mouth into a grotesque grin. Deputy Crane choked on his breath. What is that thing? The look-alike stepped forward with a sickening slurp of wet soil sliding off its body. Then it spoke, not with Carter Yule's voice, but with many voices layered on top of each other. Men's voices, women's voices, whispers of children, all speaking as one. Fathirs Wayating. Every man raised his rifle. The copy didn't flinch. It just tilted its head back, inhaled with a long, shuddering gasp, and screamed, not from its mouth. From everywhere. From its throat, its chest, its stomach. A sound vibrating through its entire body like air force through hollow wood. The scream cut through the trees, echoing off the ridge. Deputy Mason fired. The bullet hit the copy's shoulder, and the flesh folded inward like wet dough. The bullet didn't tear skin. It sank into it, swallowed whole. The copy twitched, not in pain, but in curiosity. Then, it reached into its own wound, dug its fingers in, and pulled the bullet back out, holding it up like a child showing off a pebble. The sheriff whispered, "Back away, slow." But the woods answered for them. Branches snapped behind the group. Something huge moved between the trunks. The Harlow Sisters, or worse. The sheriff shouted, "Move!" The men sprinted toward the cabin porch. The copy lunged after them, limbs bending wildly, feet slapping the earth like wet animal paws. Deputy Crane tripped on a root. The sheriff grabbed his arm, but the copy reached him first. Its long fingers clamped onto Crane's boot, and another sickening voice seeped from its throat. "Come back to the deep, brother." Deputy Crane screamed, kicking wildly. The sheriff fired point blank at the creature's head. This time the bullet tore flesh, splitting the copy's skull clean in half. But instead of falling, the head folded open, two halves of a face peeling apart like a cracked egg. Inside was nothing. No bone, no brain. Just black, sticky emptiness. The copy shuddered, leaned forward, and sprinted blindly into the woods, head still split open, shrieking like an animal caught in a trap. The men stumbled onto the cabin porch, gasping. Deputy Crane sobbed, "Sheriff, they're making copies of us. They're making copies of everyone." The sheriff steadied his rifle and looked at the tunnel entrance beneath the porch, where cold air pushed upward like something exhaling from deep below. "We go down into that tunnel," he said, voice shaking but firm. "We end whatever the Harlow Sisters started." Behind them, a low, rumbling groan rolled up from the earth. Deep, old, hungry, as if something massive beneath the cabin had awakened, and was rising. The sheriff lowered himself through the broken floorboards first, boots sinking into cold, damp soil. The air beneath the cabin was colder than winter water, cold enough that his breath came out in white clouds. Deputy Mason followed next. Then Crane. Then the others. Their lanterns flickered weakly, as if the darkness fought back. The passage sloped downward into the earth, dirt walls carved smooth, not by tools, but by hands. Thousands of them. Finger marks dragged across the tunnel walls. Long, frantic lines gouged deep into the clay, as if men had tried climbing upward, desperately clawing toward the surface. Deputy Crane whispered, "God help us, this whole tunnel. It's made of their panic." The sheriff didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because beneath all the fear soaked into the soil, beneath the cold air breathing up the tunnel, beneath the distant rumbling that vibrated through their boots, was something else. A smell. Iron. Rot. Old blood. Deputy Mason gagged. It's coming from below us, Sheriff." The sheriff's lantern pushed back just enough blackness to reveal the next chamber. They stepped inside and froze. Carved into the center of the cavern was a massive stone seat. A throne, not shaped by people, not chiseled. Grown, roots twisted into its base, winding through bones scattered around it. Human bones, animal bones, bones that didn't belong to anything that walked the earth. The throne pulsed. Slowly. Like a heart. Deputy Crane's voice cracked. That's alive." The sheriff stepped closer. Symbols were etched all around the throne. Spirals, sharp lines, jagged patterns that hurt to look at. Some glowed faintly, radiating a heat that shouldn't have existed underground. Mason whispered, "This is a summoning chair. A birthing chair. Not for people, but for something older." The sheriff's hand tightened on his rifle. Behind the throne was a tunnel darker than the rest. A pit that sloped straight down into the earth like a feeding shaft. That's where the sound came from. A low inhale. Deep. Broader than any chest. Longer than any throat. Breathing backwards. Sucking air in, instead of letting it out. Deputy Crane grabbed the sheriff's sleeve. "What's living down there?" Before the sheriff could answer, a lantern flame stretched violently toward the pit, as if pulled by an unseen force. The cavern wind reversed, Everything was being pulled toward the darkness. Then, a hand emerged, not like the copy above ground. This one was huge. White as chalk, skin stretched too tight, fingers long enough to wrap around a man's skull. It gripped the edge of the throne, pulling. Hard. A massive shoulder surfaced, slick with black earth. Then, a face, or something trying to resemble one. The head was elongated, the jaw too wide, the eyes black pits reflecting no light. When it opened its mouth, it didn't breathe out. It inhaled sharply, sucking the air from the room. Mason staggered, choking. That's not a creature. That's a void wearing skin. It leaned closer. Then it spoke, not in words, not in English, not in any human language. It spoke in breath. The sucking sound shaped itself into a whispering rasp. Daw, terse. Deputy Crane dropped to his knees, hands over his ears. The thing inhaled again, pulling at the lantern flames, pulling at their breath. The sheriff shouted, "Back! Back!" But the air was draining too fast. Then, two figures stepped into the cavern entrance. The Harlow Sisters. Tall, still, blank-faced, their hair hanging like wet vines. They walked together, bare feet silent on the dirt, eyes fixed on the throne. They didn't look at the sheriff, or the deputies. They knelt, perfectly in sync, and spoke in voices that sounded like wind whistling through dead branches. "Father, we've brought your blood." Deputy Mason grabbed his rifle, shaking hard. "What blood? What the hell do they mean?" The sisters turned toward the men and smiled. Their teeth weren't teeth, they were carved bone fragments, like the jaws of something hungry glued into human gums. The sheriff stepped forward, rifle aimed at the sisters. "This ends now. Whatever this thing is, whatever you think it is." The taller sister raised a hand, not to stop him, to quiet him. Her finger pointed at his lantern. The flame stretched toward her like a starving animal reaching for its master. And in a soft whisper she said, "You carry his scent, Sheriff." He froze. Mason backed up. "What does that mean?" "Sheriff, what does that mean?" The sisters stood. The creature beneath the throne stirred, its massive form rising higher, eyes focusing, throat expanding with hunger. The ground shook. The sheriff felt the earth tremble through his boots, through his bones, through his very breath. Then he realized, it wasn't rising. It was awakening. The sisters spoke together. "Father remembers your bloodline." The sheriff's rifle dipped an inch. His heart slammed in his chest. What bloodline?" The sisters' faces split into identical, horrifying grins. They whispered, "Yours." The throne pulsed. The creature surged upward, and the cavern ceiling began to crack. The cavern ceiling groaned as soil rained down in thick clumps, the roots writhing like veins ripped open. The sheriff stepped back, rifle raised, eyes locked on the creature dragging itself higher out of the pit. Its massive head tilted, sniffing the air. Not the room. Not the men. Him. Deputy Mason grabbed the sheriff's arm. "Sheriff, why is it looking at you?" What did those women mean? The sheriff didn't answer. Couldn't, because something inside him, something buried, had just woken up too. The creature inhaled sharply. Every lantern flickered as if sucked dry. Crane stumbled backward, hand over his chest. Feels can't breathe, can't. The sheriff shoved Crane behind him. "Stay back, all of you. It wants me." The taller Harlow sister stepped forward, hair sweeping the ground like a black veil. "It does not want you," she whispered, voice crackling like dead leaves. "It claims you." Her sister finished the sentence without missing a beat. "As it did your grandfather." The sheriff stiffened. Mason gasped. "What? Sheriff, your granddaddy died in a mine collapse." "That's what you told." The sheriff's jaw tightened. The sister smiled. "That's the story you were given," the taller murmured. "But the earth remembers. The blood remembers. Father remembers." The creature's enormous hand reached forward, fingers stretching unnaturally long, long enough to touch the sheriff from 10 feet away. He stepped back, breath trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about." Both sisters spoke in unison. "Your bloodline was chosen, fed to the earth before you were born." A pulse of heat radiated from the throne. The sheriff stumbled, gripping his head as images slammed into him. A mine, men screaming in the dark, a massive pale hand dragging someone down. A man who looked like him. Same jawline, same eyes. His grandfather, dragged beneath the earth, not crushed by it. The sheriff gasped, leaning on the rocky wall. Crane whispered. Sheriff, you knew. Somewhere in you. You knew something was wrong in your family. The ground vibrated violently. The creature pulled itself higher. 2 more limbs surfaced. Not arms, not legs. Something in between, spined. Jointed wrong, built for gripping, tearing, and dragging bodies into darkness. Deputy Mason aimed his rifle. I'm putting this thing down. Before he could fire, the shorter Harlow sister flicked her hand. The soil beneath Mason surged upward like a living wave. It wrapped around his boots, then his knees, his waist, pulling him down. Mason! Crane lunged forward, grabbing the deputy's arms, but the dirt tightened like a fist. Mason screamed as the earth swallowed his legs. It's got me. It's pulling. Help! Crane pulled harder. The taller sister stepped closer, whispering softly, Father hungers. The sheriff raised his rifle. Don't you touch him! The creature inhaled deeply. The air twisted toward its mouth, ripping sound, dust, and breath with it. The tunnel wind howling, as if the earth itself was exhaling terror. Mason's scream turned into a choking gasp as the air was pulled from his lungs. His grip slipped from Crane's hand. No, 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 Mason. Crane fell onto the dirt as Mason's face vanished beneath the soil, hands clawing, fingers scraping grooves that instantly filled back in. His last gasp was pulled straight into the creature's mouth. The sheriff's eyes widened, horrified. The Harlow sisters lowered their heads. A gift, one whispered. A first course, the other added. The sheriff fired. The bullet slammed into the taller sister's shoulder, but instead of bleeding, something else oozed out, thick, black, shimmering like oil, crawling like insects beneath skin. Crane staggered to his feet, shaking with rage and terror. You monsters! You killed him! The shorter sister smiled, tilting her head like a curious animal. He was never yours to save. The taller finished. You all were led here to feed him. The creature roared, not loud, not booming, quiet. A low, rattling moan that vibrated inside their bones. Crane clutched his ears. Stop, stop, make it stop. The throne pulsed with each inhale. The sheriff grabbed Crane, shouting over the rising hum. Run! Both tunnels behind us might collapse. G.O. Crane, now. Crane hesitated. My partner's dead, and we will be too if we don't move. The creature lunged an inch forward. Dirt and bone rained from the ceiling. Crane ran. The sheriff aimed at the sisters again, voice raw. This isn't over. The taller sister whispered, No, Sheriff. It is only beginning. The shorter pointed to the ceiling. It wakes the earth with each breath. The walls groaned. Cracks raced overhead. Pebbles dropped like hail. And then, the cavern roof gave way. The sheriff turned and sprinted, the creature's inhale pulling at his clothes, trying to drag him back. The last thing he saw before diving into the tunnel after Crane was the sisters stepping closer to the throne, unafraid, unmoving, as the falling earth swallowed everything. Darkness thundered behind him. The creature roared through the collapsing cavern, and the sheriff didn't look back. The tunnel trembled behind them, dust and shattered rock chasing the sheriff and Crane like a collapsing throat. Crane stumbled, coughing, wiping tears from his dirt-caked face. Sheriff, Mason's gone, he's gone. The sheriff shoved him forward. You want to die with him? Move! A thunderous crash shook the tunnel as the cavern behind them fully collapsed. But the sheriff froze mid-step, because the air pressure shifted. A long, low inhale echoed from behind the wall of fallen stone. The creature was still breathing, still alive, still coming. Crane gasped. Sheriff, that thing survived the cave-in. The sheriff swallowed hard, voice cracking. It didn't survive it. It caused it. The ground under them pulsed. Just once, like a heartbeat. The sheriff yanked Crane by the collar. Run! They tore through the mine tunnels, boots slamming into loose gravel, the lantern swinging wildly in Crane's shaking hand. As they reached the fork where they'd tied their ropes, Crane collapsed against a beam. I can't. My legs are. The sheriff grabbed his face, forcing eye contact. Crane. Listen to me. But Crane's pupils widened suddenly. Dark. Huge. Fixed on something behind the sheriff, Crane whispered, Sheriff, don't move. The sheriff didn't turn. He didn't breathe, because he felt it. A warm, damp breath rolling across the back of his neck. Slow, deep, wet. The same inhale the creature used underwater. The same inhale it used underground. The sheriff whispered through clenched teeth. Crane, does it see me? Crane nodded, trembling violently. Sheriff, it's right behind you. The sheriff closed his eyes. Don't scream. Don't run. Crane swallowed. It's smelling you. A long, slimy tongue brushed the sheriff's ear. The sheriff flinched but didn't move his feet. Crane's voice cracked. It's trying to figure out if you're its blood. The sheriff braced himself. He snapped his elbow back with all his strength. It connected with something massive, fleshy and wet. A sound like spilled meat hit the tunnel floor. The sheriff spun, and his lantern light caught it. A pale mass towering over him, bent sideways, squeezing through the tunnel walls. Arms jointed wrong, a chest split down the middle, stitched with roots. A face that wasn't a face, just shifting folds of skin searching for shape. It stared at him without eyes. Only smell, only sound, only hunger. Crane screamed, "Go, go, go!" They sprinted up the rope ladder they'd left hanging. The sheriff climbed first. Crane followed, gasping, the rope swinging wildly. The creature reached the ladder base. Then, it stood up, even though there wasn't enough room. Bones cracked under its stretching skin. The tunnel ceiling buckled. The sheriff shouted, "Crane, faster!" Crane climbed, sobbing. The creature opened its mouth, or the part of its face that decided to become a mouth, and sank its teeth into the rope, not biting through it, tasting it, recognizing the fibers soaked in the sheriff's sweat. Claiming him, the rope shook violently. Crane lost his grip, slid down 2 feet, and screamed, "It's got the rope! It's got the..." The sheriff drew his revolver and fired downward blindly. The muzzle flash illuminated the tunnel, and for a single second, they saw its full shape, wrong. Elongated. Limbs like spider legs. Skin sagging like wet fabric. Ribs bending outward like roots strangling their own tree. The bullet dug into its shoulder, and the creature shuddered. Not in pain, in pleasure. Crane sobbed, "Sheriff, it likes being shot." The creature grabbed the rope with one long hand and pulled. Crane screamed as he was yanked downward. The sheriff lunged down the ladder, one hand grabbing Crane's wrist. "Don't let go." Crane's boots scraped against the tunnel wall, dangling over a living nightmare. The creature released the rope, just long enough to reach for Crane himself. Its fingers stretched, upward, right toward Crane's throat. Crane shrieked, "Sheriff, it's touching me, it's touch." The sheriff fired again. The recoil nearly threw him off the ladder. The bullet ripped through one of the creature's fingers. Black ichor sprayed the tunnel. The creature reeled back, hissing, parts of its body collapsing in on themselves like deflating tissue. The sheriff used that moment. He hauled Crane up, one brutal heave at a time, until they cleared the tunnel mouth and rolled into the forest above. The rope ladder snapped behind them, not because the creature cut it, but because something heavier than a man was climbing it. Crane lay on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. The sheriff grabbed him by the collar. "Crane, listen." Crane gasped for air. "It followed us, Sheriff. It followed us out." "We let it out." The sheriff shook him. "No, we didn't. The sisters let us run for a reason." Crane stared at him, pale as bone. "Why? Why let us escape?" The sheriff whispered, "To lead it home." A sound rose from the tunnel, a slow, deliberate inhale. And then, a hand emerged. Huge, pale, stretching sideways like a spider limb testing the night air. The sheriff pulled Crane backward, eyes wide, because the creature wasn't just climbing out. It was birthing itself from the earth, and it wasn't alone. Another hand followed, then another, and another. Crane screamed, "There's more than one?" The sheriff's voice broke. "No, that's all the same creature." Crane choked. "Why does it have so many limbs?" The sheriff whispered, "Because it's still growing." The forest went silent. Then, the creature began to drag its enormous body out of the earth, and the moonlight finally revealed the shape it had been hiding underground for decades. Crane collapsed to his knees, trembling violently. "Sheriff, what the hell are we fighting?" The sheriff answered without looking away. The forest went dead silent. No wind. No insects. No breath except their own, and the slow, monstrous inhale rising from the tunnel beneath the roots. Crane backed away on shaking legs. "Sheriff, it's coming out. All of it. It's... God, how big is it?" The sheriff didn't answer, because the creature rising from the soil wasn't shaped like anything human or animal. It unfolded, limb after limb, bone after bending bone, skin stretching like wet parchment over shifting muscle. Each limb ended in a crude imitation of human hands, as if it had been sculpted by dozens of clumsy, desperate fingers. The sheriff whispered, "It's a gatherer. A collector. It's been stealing body shapes, trying to make one perfect form." Crane stared at him, horrified. "And it thinks you are the final piece." The sheriff lifted his rifle, jaw tightening. "Then it dies here." The creature's head rose, an enormous bulb of flesh with no clear face, only indentations where stolen human features had once been. It turned toward the sheriff, not seeing him, sensing him. A voice leaked out of its shifting folds. "Blood. Phenol blood." Crane screamed as the monster lunged. "Sheriff, look out!" The sheriff dove aside. But the impact shook the forest, trees splitting like matchsticks as the creature's limbs slammed into the ground. It wasn't chasing them. It was corralling them, driving them toward the old Harlow cabin. Crane grabbed the sheriff's arm. Why is it pushing us backward? The sheriff's eyes widened. Because the cabin isn't a home. He pointed to the overgrown structure, its windows glowing faintly with an unnatural, pulsing light. It's a feeding room. The creature lurched forward, limbs arrhythmic like broken marionette strings, parts of men's faces pushed through its skin. Eyes fluttering, mouths opening and closing silently, hands reaching outward from within its body, writhing like trapped souls. Crane gagged. They're alive inside it, Sheriff. They're alive. The sheriff grabbed Crane's shirt collar, forcing him to breathe. We need to get inside that cabin. The sisters left something behind. Crane shook his head violently. I'm not going in there. It's a damn slaughterhouse. Crane, listen to me. The creature roared, shaking the forest floor. The sheriff shouted over the thunder. That place was built to control it. The Harlow Sisters used it like a leash. Crane froze. What do you mean? That glowing wood? Those symbols? The throne underground? The sheriff pointed. That cabin was a container. A cage. A ritual prison. Crane's voice cracked. But why us? The sheriff looked away, then finally said it. Because my bloodline opened it. And my bloodline is the only thing that can close it. Inside the cabin, the last ritual. They sprinted inside. The air was thick with rot and incense. Faded symbols covered the floorboards. A dried pool of blood circled the center of the room. Crane gagged. This whole place, it's soaked with sacrifices. The sheriff knelt, tracing a symbol with his finger. It's old Appalachian sigil work. The sisters didn't create the creature. They inherited it. Crane's eyes widened. So what do we do? The sheriff didn't answer. He picked up a rusted, curved blade lying beside an altar. Crane stepped back. Sheriff, that knife is for bloodletting. The sheriff nodded. My blood. My family's mistake. Crane shook violently. You're not serious. You're not. Heavy footsteps boomed outside, rattling the cabin walls. The creature was approaching. Slowly, confidently, as if it knew the chapter was closing and it had already won. The sheriff pressed the blade to his palm. Crane grabbed his arm. Sheer FF, stop. Let's find another way. Please. There isn't one. Blood dripped onto the sigil. The wood soaked it up instantly, glowing red, then gold, then blinding white. The forest outside fell silent. The creature froze mid-step. The sheriff cried out, clutching his head as the cabin shook violently. Crane held him upright. What's happening? The sheriff gasped. I'm calling it. Forcing it back. Closing the cage. Outside, the monster screeched. Its limbs thrashed. Its body convulsed. Faces screamed from beneath its skin. The sheriff shouted, Crane, keep me conscious. If I pass out, the ritual breaks. Crane slapped him across the face. Stay awake, damn it. You stay with me. The cabin boards rattled and split as roots burst from the ground, wrapping around the creature's limbs, pulling it toward the glowing threshold. The monster shrieked, ripping trees from the soil, tearing holes in the earth. Crane yelled over the chaos. Sheriff, it's too strong. It's breaking the ritual. The sheriff pressed the blade deeper into his palm and screamed as more blood poured. The sigil flared violently. The creature's body snapped backward, folding unnaturally as if crushed by an invisible hand. Every stolen human face beneath its skin opened its mouth and shrieked in agony. A blinding column of light erupted from the cabin floor. The sheriff collapsed onto his knees, barely conscious. The creature clawed the dirt, begging, pulling, screaming in 100 voices. Crane held the sheriff tightly. Finish it. Don't stop now. The sheriff forced out a whisper. Close. The light intensified. The creature's limbs tore away like paper. Its body split into chunks that dissolved midair. Its head, if it was a head, was sucked into the blinding vortex. With one final, earth-shaking howl, it vanished. Everything fell silent. Aftermath. The sheriff collapsed. Crane caught him, shaking him. Sheriff? Hey, stay with me. The sheriff opened his eyes slowly. It's gone. Crane sobbed with relief. You did it. You killed that thing. The sheriff shook his head weakly. No. Crane. He pointed to the sigil on the floor, now dark and cracked. I didn't kill it. Crane froze. What do you mean? The sheriff whispered. I put it back to sleep, but not forever. Crane's face blanched. When does it wake up again? The sheriff closed his eyes. When my bloodline ends, Crane stepped back, horrified. So, someone in your family, someone after you. The sheriff nodded. It'll come for them. Thunder rumbled in the distance. A cold wind swept through the broken cabin walls. Crane whispered. Then what do we do? The sheriff stared into the dark forest. We warn the world. He stood, shaking, gripping Crane's shoulder. And we burn this land. Every inch of it. Crane nodded. Together, they walked out of the Harlow cabin for the last time. Behind them, deep beneath the ruined earth, something massive inhaled. Slow, patient, waiting for blood, waiting for the next Harlow heir. Some places heal with time. The Harlow cabin never did. The forest grew back. The earth sealed over the tunnels, and the wind carried away the last screams left in the soil. But nothing was truly gone. Not the sisters, not the rituals, and certainly not the thing they fed. Whatever the sheriff trapped that night still breathes beneath the ridge. A slow, patient inhale waiting for the next drop of blood from his line. Maybe it sleeps for years, maybe centuries. But everything buried in the mountains eventually comes back hungry. If you ever feel the ground trembling under your boots in the Ozarks, don't wait to find out what's waking up. Some stories were meant to stay hidden. Some remains were never meant to be found. And some things are still listening. Thank you for watching Forgotten Remains, where the past never stays buried.